Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is DreamFiction and today we will be reading the story Issei, the True Dragon of the Apocalypse, translated into English by Jyanzein herself without much encouragement. Thinking that no one would be around the corridors at this hour, Penemu came out with her all-white pajamas covering her entire body. The woman opened the door and headed for the stairs. As she turned to go down them, her gaze was filled with surprise. Light was streaming in through one of the windows, hitting Issei's body perfectly. The brown-haired man carried his katana over his shoulder. The nightlight gave it a divine touch, and his completely serious look only helped to further dazzle that fact. "We need to talk." After finally reacting, Penemu quickly wiped away her tears and looked at him with great seriousness, as was a habit of hers. "Line jump. You even came all the way to Grigori," Penemu commented, giving a small sigh as she leaned against the ledge. The two were alone in one of the many towers of the castle. Issei approached, leaning next to her. "I'm sorry, but you won't get rid of me that easily," the protagonist replied with a slightly mocking tone, causing Penemu to glare at him coldly. "I've already told you many times. It's not a matter that concerns you. Don't force me to throw you out of here," the woman commented, looking up at the night sky. "Earlier I said I was doing it for you. But now I realize that's not true." Hearing this, Penemu couldn't help but look at him with some curiosity. "I do it for me. I'm doing it for me because I can't bear to see you like that. I can't bear to see you sad. I can't bear to see you down. I can't bear to see you cry. I can't bear any of it." Issei, it was the simple word from Penemu, who could only be impressed at her student's insistence. "I stand corrected. It's not just you or me." Issei finally lowered his gaze, giving her a chuckling smile. "It's for both of us." It's just." Issei was surprised when Penemu began to shiver slightly from the cold as she tried to find the words to continue. "I really want to but I can't." She shut her eyes tightly as she felt the screams returning to her head. Penemu opened her eyes in shock as she felt something warm embrace her. Again, it was that feeling she had felt the first time the two of them had gotten close. That pleasant feeling. Penemu felt like a small comforting shiver all over her body after the sensation of being hugged by Issei. Issei arranged his jacket even more, doing his best to make it cover half of her body. "It's too cold a day for you to go out in your pajamas," he commented, causing Penemu to look at him intently. "I should have let you change your clothes at least." "Sorry," he concluded, squeezing a little tighter with the woman. Penemu continued to watch her face and made no resistance to the approach. In fact, she had moved a couple of steps closer when she felt the leading man want to pull her in. She continued to look at his face as she watched the wind make her hair wave freely. Her brown eyes stared steadily at the moon, waiting for a response from the woman next to her. Without her noticing, her crimson eyes flashed as her face slowly began to blush. She was completely immersed in his face and features. For some reason unknown to her, she had been completely in awe and couldn't take her eyes off him. "The day marks another year." Hearing Penemu speak, Issei turned his full attention to her. "The day marks another year of what I did. That's why I'm like this." Penemu lowered her gaze, remembering the horrible events that transpired on this horrible day. "It's been another year since I disassociated myself from my original sin. Would you like to tell me that story?" Issei asked. Doubt instantly struck Penemu and her crimson eyes reflected it perfectly. When Issei thought that perhaps she had asked too much of him, she nodded. The protagonist blinked, then looked at her with great seriousness. "It all began on a night as cold as this, but first, we must go back to the beginning of it all." Flashback. "A new cadre?" exclaimed Brachial, looking from head to toe at Penemu's body. "This is incredible, it's Penemu herself." The aforementioned gave him a bored look, indicating that she didn't have time for this. "She fell because she began to enjoy the killings," Azazel commented simply, there being small flashbacks of Penemu killing en masse, where slowly, her angelic and pure face began to turn into a depraved one until finally her wings changed to a black color. "It's another person just like you, Kakabiel," Azazel commented, looking sideways at the aforementioned. "Now, that's two cadres already who are obsessed with war," commented the leader with a big sigh at the end. "Let's go." Kakabiel exclaimed with a frightening laugh at the end. "Don't say it like that. It seems as if you now suddenly disagree with our ambitions." "The only ambition I have now is to end this damned war," Azazel commented with a grimace of annoyance. Hearing this, Penemu began to listen to the conversation with considerable interest. "As far as we know, the angels want to summon the humans to war to gain more power. The idea is to wipe them out before they succeed." Azazel looked at Penemu for a short second. "I was planning to send you because you are the strongest." Azazel closed his eyes wisely. "But, I understand that you don't want to take the mission to kill over 400 former comrades." Azazel couldn't finish speaking as Penemu spread her wings in search of the target. The leader watched her with wide eyes, then let out a big sigh. Great, she's exactly like the other idiot. He thought, clearly referring to Kakabiel. This is the first time I'll be killing angels. I wonder, what will their screams be like? What will their blood be like? What will they look like if I rip off limbs? Will they try to fly if I rip off their wings? Penemu asked herself all those questions, which only managed to further increase the psychopathic and sadistic smile to such levels that it almost didn't fit on her face. When it finally came, she finished them all off without a second glance. To the humans. Angels. Even the animals that crossed her path. Anything that had life was taken away by her, and she felt great to have that kind of power in her hands. It felt great to see the despair in the eyes of all her victims. It was a vice that had no end, and she didn't want it to have an end either. Is it over already? Penemu asked herself with great boredom. Almost her entire body was stained completely with blood. The woman began to walk over the pile of corpses as she sheathed her katana. The only thing she could think of was what her next mission would be. That continued until she heard a few small sobs from the church she had destroyed. Rather than wanting to kill it, she was curious to know who it was. It was very unusual for a victim to survive her outbursts of madness because once they started, she did not stop until she killed everything that moved. The woman decided to fly, expanding her wings. She quickly landed above the rubble of the church. Is that cross hollow? The cadre wondered, seeing that the sobs were coming from the only wall that had managed to hold up where there was a huge cross. Penemu walked over and quickly opened the cross, seeing how inside it was a blonde girl. Who are you? She asked, raising an eyebrow. At the sight of the wings, the girl hugged her tightly, taking Penemu completely by surprise. Explosions and screams were heard from outside. The little girl screamed and cried. There were bad guys outside, that's why I hid in the cross. She explained, clearly seeing that she didn't know she was in front of the killer. Penemu tried to push her away, but the girl raised her gaze, where her tearful eyes shone brightly. The cadre's gaze wavered as she met the girl's eyes. But you came to help me. She exclaimed with a big smile. Penemu pointed at herself, raising an eyebrow. Me? Yes. She exclaimed with a big smile. I prayed to God to bring an angel to save me from the bad guys. Penemu began to feel quite uncomfortable and tried to push the girl away. Go to your parents, she commented, looking away. I don't have parents. Commented the girl as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Penemu looked at her with great astonishment after her words. What? I'm an orphan. They abandoned me when I was born. She commented as she clung to the cadre's arm. Penemu tried to push her away again to fly away, but the girl quickly clung to her waist again. Can I come with you, please? The girl commented, lowering her head. I don't want to be alone. Penemu looked at her for a short second, then carried her in bridal form. She had planned to take her to Grigori and let the others take care of the girl, but she never expected that she wouldn't take off an inch. Days passed, and the war continued to progress. At the terms of 2 months, Penemu finally reluctantly agreed to play with the girl, as she had nothing else to do and was very bored. That was a turning point, as she began to give her more importance thereafter. But she never put her above her missions. After all, killing en masse was as vital a necessity to her as breathing. Time continued to pass, and Penemu finally asked her age after 5 months, learning that the girl was 10 years old. After almost a year, the relationship between the two of them had improved quite a bit. In fact, Penemu loved her so much that she had organized a birthday party for her, with only Azazel as a guest. Still, the girl had such a good time at her first birthday party that she called Penemu her sister for the first time. At that moment, Penemu felt that maybe, just maybe, murder wasn't the only thing that could make her happy. With Azazel's help, Penemu was finally able to call the girl's sister and finally gave her a name of her own, which would be Ludmiel. The months passed like water in a waterfall, and Penemu's happiness had never gone so far. She already treated Ludmiel as if she was the second most important thing in her life. In fact, it was so much so that she beat the crap out of Kakabiel for wanting to flirt with her, putting ideas into her that when she's 2 or 3 years older, she'll be his. After that, Kakabiel didn't dare to talk to the girl anymore. After the days passed, her birthday came again, having the same only guest as last time. Still, this birthday would end in a spooky way. We need someone to go to Japan. Barakiel suddenly entered the room, completely elated. Azazel blew his bugle for one last time in surprise, indicating that Barakiel's appearance was not at all expected. The angels want to form a new pact with the humans to bring some sacred weapon species. Cadre exclaimed, causing a sharp grin to appear on Penemu's face. I'll handle it. The woman quickly got up, leaving Ludmiel on the ground. But, my birthday, the girl commented with great disappointment. When I return from dialoguing with them, we'll continue with your birthday. Cadre commented, stroking Ludmiel's head. That's not fair. You never take me with you. She commented with a little pout. I'd like to meet those angels you always talk to. Some other time. She stated, taking off her party hat. The cadre approached Azazel, grabbing him by his shirt. Listen well. You're the only one I have any confidence in, so take care of her. She commented, then let go. Yeah, Azazel commented matter-of-factly, wiping one ear with his little finger. Enemu shot off along with Barakiel, leaving Ludmiel and Azazel alone. As the leader thought to give the girl attention, he could see Raynor perched in the doorway, wearing her typical masochistic dress, which in those times was not so typical. Do you like it? The woman asked with a mischievous look on her face, making Azazel swallow a lot of saliva. Lately I noticed that you are resisting your carnal desires quite a bit, the woman commented as she began to bend over in a very sensual way. And I don't like that. She concluded, leaving Azazel a good view of her ass. The leader tried, but couldn't take his eyes off her. Fuck it. He thought, walking over to her, then grabbing her by the waist and carrying her like a sack of potatoes, making Raynor giggle quite a bit at that. Ludmiel just watched this with a pouty face, unable to understand what had happened right now. She didn't have much time to process it, as a silhouette quite familiar to everyone leaned against the doorframe. Hey, brat. Ludmiel looked at the subject rather intently. Wouldn't you like to know what your sister's job is? The man asked, smiling a wicked grin at the end. Blind jump. Enemu made his way through all the angels and humans, killing every person that came in her way. Her smile of complete joy and madness grew bigger and bigger as blood splattered again and again on her face. The madness and extreme pleasure of the slaughter had already flooded her mind, so she could only barely make out the screams of the people, while her vision seemed to be quite obscured, fixated only on the faces of the subjects and the blood. When she thought she was done with everyone, she felt someone tugging on her sleeve, so she didn't hesitate for a second, turning around with that horrifying smile on her face, burying the katana and piercing her entire chest without any remorse. Sister. At that moment, Enemu could feel her heart almost explode in pain. Her vision quickly recovered at the same time as her depraved mind came back in order. The only thing she could do was to take Ludmiel's nearly dead body in her arms as the girl was gushing a huge amount of blood. Sister, why? Were the last words before her eyes darkened completely, becoming lifeless. In those moments, Enemu's mind completely blocked as all the memories together with Ludmiel flashed through her head. All those memories were slowly becoming stained with her blood. Enemu trembled and fell to her knees as tears fell non-stop from her eyes that were still completely shocked. She simply couldn't process what was happening. She couldn't process that it had killed her. Her eyes began to shake violently as the glow in them began to disappear, and she could only do one thing in that instant. The piercing scream left her without vocal cords, so afterwards she could only rest her head on Ludmiel's chest as her crying seemed to slowly flood the corpses around her. Then flashback. After that, something changed inside me. I was no longer like a fallen angel, but neither did I regain the innocence and purity of an angel. Enemu commented, closing her eyes deeply. Issei raised his hand, brushing away the tears that were flowing from the cadre's eyes. Enemu couldn't help but look at him in complete shock after witnessing that he was still looking at her with that same kind expression, despite what she had told him. Thank you very much. Issei bowed his head, indicating his gratitude. Thank you so much for telling me something so profound for you, the protagonist commented, then raised his gaze. Now, I understand why you feel that way without a doubt, it's a very complicated day. He said, then looked deeply into her eyes. Although it's not exactly the same, I also have a great resentment in my heart. When Raynor used and killed me, discarding me as if I were mere trash, I felt as if I had been stabbed from all sides. But, unlike a physical wound, these never go away, Issei commented, holding a hand to his chest. That's what we have in common. There are many times at night when I lament and think about how it is that we could have been. But still, I don't spend the rest of my life moping. The final comment made Enemu's eyes widen. There are people who really love me, people who always expect me to be well, people who are also very important to my life. For that very reason, I always try to do my best and to be able to be happy together with those people who love me. Thanks to those people is why I continue my day by day. Thanks to those people who are completely irreplaceable to me. Issei closed his eyes, then positioned a hand on top of Enemu's head, making the cadre look at him intently. That's exactly why I'm asking you, could you be happy? The protagonist's question just fell as the moon cleared, causing Enemu to widen her eyes beyond belief after seeing the big smile so genuine that it gave off a myriad of emotions that ran through Enemu's body. Comfort, warmth, joy and, above all, love. I know it's not a simple thing, but I'll support you all the way. The young man commented, stroking Enemu's head, causing a huge blush to shoot across her face. What do you say? Penemu lowered her head for a short second, having for the first time a nice memory of Ludmil since her death. Sis. That memory was when he called her sister for the first time. A memory that undoubtedly filled her with happiness. I think she wouldn't be happy either, she commented in a whisper, which could be heard by the protagonist. I'll try. She concluded, moving a little closer to Issei. Great was all Issei commented, watching as the clouds began to mobilize rapidly. They both stood there for a couple of seconds in silence. Unlike before, this was such a comforting silence, it stirred both of their feelings with great happiness. Why are you helping me? Penemu's question caught the protagonist somewhat off guard, though he was able to answer it smoothly. Remember when I said that there were irreplaceable people for me? He asked. They were both staring at the moon, and yet he could tell that Penemu nodded, indicating that she was looking for an answer. Those people snuck into my life without me even realizing it, and now they're a fundamental part of me. He commented, pointing his hand toward the night sky, his 5 fingers outstretched. They are 5. Mitsuda, Motohama, Drake, Tiamat. Issei closed all fingers, leaving only his thumb. And you. Penemu felt like she was knocked out with a single blow after those last 2 words. Or at least, she felt that way, as she could barely breathe because of the great wave of heat that was embracing her whole chest, which was expanding along her whole body, transmitting that beautiful feeling that was consuming her completely. That heat so intense that she didn't want it to stop. It wasn't hurting her, all it was doing was making her feel wonderful. She wanted these sensations to last forever. She wanted these feelings to flood her whole body so that it wouldn't let her reason. She just wanted to dive into that sea of happiness. In that sea that makes her heartbeat so strong. And all those sensations. All of them. They arose from only 2 words. By only one person. For that person that she could not stop looking at with a huge blush on her face. Simply, she was mesmerized by the overwhelming beauty that she found everything that had to do with Issei at the moment. She doesn't know at what moment it happened, it just happened. And she was very happy about it. Issei, the protagonist, looked at her with great surprise, which quickly turned into a blush after seeing a smile so pure on the cadre's face that it rivaled Tiamat's. Thank you. Penemu closed her eyes deeply, then brought her lips close. Issei could only blush even more as he felt Penemu's kiss impact his cheek, conveying to him all the sensations she was currently holding back. After that, Penemu moved even closer to Issei, leaning their bodies together, at the same time resting her head on the young man's shoulder with a calm smile on her face. I can't believe what I'm feeling, she thought, visualizing the night that seemed to go on forever. You have me completely surrendered at your feet. The image of Tiamat flashed through her mind for a short second, causing her to chuckle internally. I get it now, friend. It's impossible not to fall in love with someone like that. In fact, that makes 2 of us. She concluded, snuggling even closer next to Issei, enjoying their closeness as much as she could. Time flew by for the 2 of them, and though they wanted to continue longer watching the full moon, just the 2 of them, they had already enjoyed the sights for too long. We'd better go to sleep. Issei commented as he separated from Penemu. We'll be busy tomorrow. Issei was about to create the magic circle to leave, but was interrupted when he felt Penemu tug on his manga. The protagonist looked over his shoulders with intrigue, only to get a little nervous when he saw the cadre's very tender expression. Would you like to stay over? She asked with a hint of shyness that was barely perceptible. Hearing the proposal, Issei just smiled. Of course. Line jump. When she proposed me to stay over, I didn't imagine precisely this, Issei thought with a slight cold sweat as he lay there. On his back was Penemu, who seemed to be very comfortable as she looked at him. The protagonist became even more nervous as he felt Penemu move even closer, gluing their bodies together. The cadre rested her forehead, the nape of Issei's neck, giving a small sigh that contained her happiness. Thank you for accepting. I really needed it, she commented, snuggling into Issei even more. What are we doing tomorrow? The protagonist tried to quickly change the subject. True, he had slept many times with Tiamat, but this was completely different. I don't know, cadre replied, bowing her shoulders. I already had something in mind, but we'll have to change the plan. At the very least, enjoy these next 2 days. You'll have a little break before we start again. Oh, thanks. Issei didn't sound very convinced. What did Penemu have planned? Supposedly, the previous training can't take place due to lack of time, and now he's going to have 2 days off thanks to the new training. Something smelled really bad, but he decided to leave his bad thoughts behind when he finally resumed his training. 2 days off, huh? Thought the protagonist out loud. You want me to beat you at chess like today? He asked in a mocking tone, making Penemu chuckle. Beat me? Penemu scoffed. Keep in mind that I wasn't concentrating. In fact, with the skill you have right now, you wouldn't be able to beat even an amateur. Hey. A small pout tugged at Issei's lips. At least I know how to cook. You don't like my food? Penemu asked with a slightly hurt tone. It always comes out burnt and tasteless. I'm sure if you used an oven, you'd send us all flying. Issei scoffed, receiving a small playful slap on her back from the cadre. If you're such a good teacher, then teach me. Penemu declared, causing Issei to blink in slight surprise. The protagonist turned his face to see Penemu's crimson glowing eyes were closer than he expected. Seeing her longing gaze asking for a positive response, Issei couldn't resist. Very well. He replied, resting a hand on her cheek. I'll do my best. Penemu just answered him by resting her hand on his, at the same time cupping her cheek even more in Issei's hand. She had actually liked that interaction much more than it appeared at first glance. Issei turned away again, giving a small yawn. Good night. Good night. Penemu returned the greeting, resting both of her hands on the protagonist's back rather affectionately. She was sure this would be the first time she would sleep so peacefully in years, even centuries. But the cadre planned to make one last call before she slept next to her future lover. A small violet magic circle appeared in her left ear. Do you hear me, Tannen? Penemu? Tannen's plaintive voice could be heard from the other side. What the fuck, it's 3 in the morning. Sorry, Penemu quickly apologized, resting her face on the back of Issei's neck with a hint of guilt. Yeah. Whatever. Tannen gave a big yawn. Are you feeling better now? Yes, she gave a slight nod, making Tannen smile. I'm glad to hear that. Tannen's pleased voice reaffirmed his words. By the way, where is the dragon brat? I didn't see him arrive. The smile couldn't help but creep across Penemu's face, as did his significant change in voice. He's here with me. The rather affectionate and loving tone was impossible for Tannen to miss. Oh, yeah. The dragon's slightly flirtatious tone caused a small blush to frame the cadre's face. Are you having fun? Forget about that. I called you about a more important thing. She commented with great seriousness. At that moment, Tannen's mocking look disappeared from her face. What do you want? In the end, I came to the decision not to do the training I had in mind. He explained with great seriousness. For the next 2 days we won't do anything, but I need you to bring Tiamat. We will need her sword to do the training. Also tell her that when she starts, her presence will also be needed. I'm already running out of Phoenix tears and we need to keep an eye on him at all times. From the way you're telling it, it seems like the training will be even worse than what you had in mind, commented the dragon very seriously, seeing that this was no joke. It will be much worse. She commented, looking at Issei with a small hint of concern. But, it's the only thing we can do with the time we have. Penemu lowered her head slightly, giving a sigh. Also tell Tiamat that the 3 of us will have to keep an eye on his training at all times. Penemu's gaze darkened slightly. There is too much risk of death. Very well, I will tell her. The dragon commented from the other side, unable to hide his slight concern at the method Penemu would use. Penemu cut the transmission, then looked at Issei with slight concern. I'm giving the green light to this plan because I know you can pull it off. But you'll need to do your best to go all the way, Cadre thought, then took one last look at her metal closet where there was a pair of robes, exactly the same robes she had used in her first confrontation against Issei. Those same robes, which seemed to have an enormous weight diaresis. Issei opened his eyes slowly. The protagonist could not help but give a big yawn as he carved his eyes with great fatigue. It was only normal, considering he had fallen asleep at 3 in the morning. Issei slightly widened his eyes after remembering everything that happened yesterday. The facts hit his head hard again as he felt how someone was hugging him tightly. The young man removed the sheets in one swift movement, causing the huge silky locks of hair to shoot out all around the bed. Although this time, there was a big difference, as the hair was not light blue, but a deep black with small violet highlights. Although Issei was wearing his clothes and Penemu was wearing pajamas that covered her entire body, he couldn't help but blush as he felt how the woman was hugging him so tightly. It seemed like she was doing everything she could to keep him from running away, even though it was obvious he wasn't going anywhere. Issei could only divert his gaze to her breasts for a short second, as she wasn't wearing the blindfolds and the front left a huge cleavage on display. Penemu frowned, removing a hand from Issei's waist to cover her mouth from her prominent yawn. Her eyes opened, revealing that beautiful crimson glow in them, where they now seemed to be more gorgeous than ever. That was thanks to the flash of vigor they gave off with such intensity, something she didn't have before. Penemu lowered her gaze, seeing that the prominent cleavage of her breasts was squeezing Issei's chest tightly, something that was quite normal, since she was attached to it. Seeing her gaze, Issei thought she would immediately pull away, but instead of doing that, Penemu hugged him again and entwined her legs with his. Good morning. The fall commented with a small blush on her face as she snuggled her head into the protagonist's neck. Penemu was totally carried away by her emotions, so she just wanted to be close to Issei right now and keep enjoying that beautiful feeling that was gushing through her chest. That warmth made her wake up as happy as she had not been for centuries. In fact, she had never woken up to this wonderful feeling before and she wanted to make sure it wouldn't end so quickly. Good morning. Issei replied, hesitating a bit at the slightly compromising situation. But he didn't plan on complaining. Enemu lifted her face, giving him a cute smile between her teeth, something that took the chestnut by complete surprise. Thank you so much for yesterday. I mean it. Chapter 24. The Anniversary of the Fallen. Is no one awake? Issei asked in the main kitchen. Enemu sat at the small round table in the center as she set up a chessboard. It's normal for no one to be there. Fallen replied, arranging her wet hair. It's very early and no one here is known for having discipline. She explained, causing Issei to look at her with a small blush. That was normal, since the woman was still in her white pajamas despite having bathed. Thus, her huge cleavage was still present and worst of all, the small drops of water falling from her hair gave it a more seductive touch. It's a pity, because this place has everything, the protagonist commented, sitting across from Enemu as he looked at the numerous kitchens and contraptions such as coffee makers, among other things. We'll probably have time to ourselves until noon. The cadre's words caused Issei to look up at her, seeing that the woman was giving him a small smile. What would you like to do? She asked, beginning to arrange her pieces. The protagonist rubbed his hair as he mimicked Enemu. After playing with you, I'd like to see the castle. I didn't get the chance last time I came. He raised his gaze with a big grin between his teeth. And afterwards, if you want I can help you prepare lunch. Hearing this, Enemu gave him a cute smile, nodding quickly, indicating that she really liked the idea. After that talk, Enemu set up her last piece, causing the atmosphere to change dramatically. It was as if out of nowhere they were in the middle of a war and they were in crossfire. The game continued as usual. Enemu noticed a great improvement in Issei's ability to read the moves, but he still had a long way to go. Enemu watched without a word as Issei moved a pawn to the front, covering the king from being killed by the rook. Is that the kind of move you would make? Doesn't that seem a bit cowardly to you? Issei couldn't help but look at her in confusion as he didn't understand exactly what she was referring to. The cadre just took the rook and eliminated the pawn without further ado. You're the king. It is not right for you to sacrifice your subjects to survive longer. Hearing this, Issei fixed his gaze on the side of his board, watching as numerous pieces protected the king at the same time as these pieces protected each other. You should always think carefully about what your next move will be. Not to keep surviving, but to make everyone survive. She commented, resting both hands underneath her chin. The king who sacrifices his companions just to live a little longer is a bad king. It is natural for many of your companions to die in a real war, but you should always see to it that those casualties are as few as possible. Issei could only look at her with great confusion. What is it that you are trying to tell me? What I mean is that a good king is not one who sacrifices his comrades. A true king is one who carefully analyzes the situation, seeks a solution, and tries to ensure that the welfare of his servants is always on par with the victory of his kingdom. Cadre explained, causing a small smile to appear on her face as she saw Issei's eyes sparkle at the revelation. Besides, the difference between the two kings is crucial by a single point, she commented, taking Issei's king in her hand. The king who always sacrifices his servants to move on will never look at finding a broader solution. All in all, that king is most likely brainless and has no idea what the word strategy means. A somewhat amused look graced Enemu's face. For the moment, you are the brainless king. Hearing the last part, a small twitch appeared on the protagonist's eyebrow. Had she said all that just to annoy him? Or did those words have a deeper meaning that he couldn't quite decipher? One question or the other, Issei knew he had to focus on one thing. Stop being brainless. The protagonist's gaze focused on his pieces intently while everything around him went black except for the board. He had stood completely still, but his mind was going at 1,000 engines per second, processing every possible move he could make with his remaining pieces and also seeing how he could manage to move Enemu with such moves. Could I move my knight to the front? What if I castled? Would I have a chance of checkmate if I tried to advance with my 2 knights and my remaining rook? How do I go about defending the king if he planned to attack with a large part of my pieces? How do I make it so that those pieces can defend each other? Thousands of questions began to fill Issei's head. Enemu caught on to this quickly, causing a small discreet smile to appear on her face. That's right, you'll certainly never generate questions, and if you hardly ever ask yourself questions, the less prepared you'll be to find the answers. She thought as she narrowed her eyes slightly. Think and think. Don't stop until you find the answers. If they are negative, simply ask yourself another possible solution. Sooner or later, you'll get to what you're looking for. Issei's eyes twinkled slightly, then castled. Enemu watched this move with a small smile. Now, your rook is quite unprotected. But you managed to protect the king, at the same time you didn't sell your knights. She commented, giving a small sigh. There were better solutions, she stated, killing the rook with her queen. But for a first step, it's pretty good. She concluded, giving him a small smile that he instantly reciprocated. Wow, I didn't expect to find you two here. They both turned towards the direction of the voice, seeing that it was Azazel. That's what we should say. The protagonist commented. I'm beginning to suspect that you're taking my companion's training not so seriously, he stated, narrowing his eyes suspiciously. Remember, today is a special day for the fallen, Brad. Commented the leader, wiping his ear with his little finger. As their leader, I can't miss the ceremony. He explained, then fixing his gaze on Penemu's. Besides, I'm here because I need Penemu's help. Special day? Issei wondered, trying to remember. You need my help. Penemu rose from her seat, looking at him with a raised eyebrow. Can't you summon the necessary materials through the magic circles? She asked, causing a somewhat nervous smile to appear on Azazel's face. Well, the problem is that I can't summon said materials if they don't exist in the first place. He explained, rubbing the back of his neck. Hearing the answer, Penemu put both hands on his hips and let out a big sigh. I should have figured always everything at the last minute. By the way, did you get a mate? Azazel's question made Issei remember the event that was being celebrated today. A dangerous look decorated the cadre's face, indicating not to speak any further or she would punish him. Azazel simply looked at her. I think you'll miss another year, he commented, looking at her with slight seriousness. Penemu just looked away, lowering her head slightly. Azazel and Penemu watched with slight strangeness as Issei rose from his seat, stepping in front of the cadre. I'll go with her. Penemu's eyes widened like saucers after hearing the statement, while Azazel blinked a couple of times, thinking that he had not heard correctly. Seeing the two's reaction, Issei couldn't help but get a little nervous. Well, if she wants to, and if a demon can participate, of course. No, of course you can participate, Azazel commented, still a bit surprised. But, I don't think she. The cadre interrupted himself when he saw how Penemu tugged Issei's manga with utmost shyness. He simply couldn't believe what he was seeing. Issei turned his gaze after sensing her calling out to him, only to be slightly surprised when Penemu lowered her gaze with a small blush on her face. The grip on his manga intensified, at the same time Penemu raised her gaze to look him directly in the eyes. Seriously, you really want to come with me? She asked, again averting her gaze as she was unable to hold eye contact. Seeing how she was acting, Issei could only think that she looked very cute. This facet was new to her, and he had to say he rather liked it. Of course. He exclaimed, giving her a bright smile. Hearing the response, Penemu looked up at him, giving him a small but cute smile. Thank you. Penemu let him know how grateful she was when he felt the grip on his sleeve intensify even more. Azazel could only stare at this with wide eyes. She hasn't acted like this since, he thought with great disbelief, then sketched a big smile. Seriously, that brat has more potential than I had imagined. I should thank him for making Penemu show her affection again, even if it's only to one person. Azazel's thoughts were interrupted as Penemu grabbed him by the shukata to drag him outside. Let's get to work. We can't waste time. A glint full of conviction graced Penemu's eyes. Hey, wait. Azazel exclaimed as he was dragged away by Penemu. Where did you get so much energy? Issei could only stare at the scene with a huge bead of sweat. Blind jump. How do I look, Drag? Issei asked, adjusting his black jacket. The protagonist was in Penemu's room, trying on a somewhat casual outfit to go out with the cadre tonight. Issei caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror, seeing that his outfit consisted of an all-black garment, except for his shirt, which was of a white color. You look phenomenal, partner, the dragon commented through the gauntlet, giving a small nod to himself. Perfect. Replied the protagonist with a small smile, then looking towards the window. Afterwards, we'd have to thank Azazel for lending me these clothes. I was very nervous at the thought of going to such an important moment in my academy clothes. He commented with slight trepidation as he watched as numerous colorful lights decorated the bridge at the same time as many decorated boats were entering the cave. All that only indicated that the celebration was about to begin. Issei heard someone knocking on the door, so he turned around to greet the person. If you're looking for Penemu, she's making final preparations for. Issei's voice became increasingly inaudible as said person had entered the room. She looked much more beautiful than usual as she was wearing a maid's outfit, something that was impossible for her to go unnoticed by Issei. Penemu stared at him and intertwined her hands under her breasts, giving her an even more adorable look. Do you like it? The question made Issei wake up and stop staring at her so intently. I didn't know you'd come in a maid's outfit, the Brown commented, rubbing his hair as a small blush decorated his face. It looks great on you. He finished, delivering her a tone with complete sincerity. This made Penemu happy and she didn't mind showing it to him openly. "You told me a while back that a maid's outfit would suit me quite well," she commented, walking over to him to take his hand. "Did you remember that?" thought the leading man with slight surprise in his gaze. "Come on," Cadre ordered in a sweet tone, giving him a smile. Issei could only look at her with even more surprise at her lively attitude. Finally, he reciprocated that attitude, clutching his hand tighter as he followed her happily. A few minutes later. "Is this the place?" Issei asked Azazel, receiving a nod from him. "Everything is That's the idea. Even your demon eyes aren't going to help you." Azazel pushed him into the swan-shaped boat, falling in beside Penemu. "Have a safe trip," commented the leader with a slight playful tone as he went to sit in one of the rear boats. "We're lucky to be the first," Penemu stated, causing Issei to look at her quizzically. "As we leave the cave, we'll be able to see and hear the fireworks being set off." Although he couldn't see her, Issei was sure that Penemu was very excited. Probably, seeing this always from her room hurt her a little, no matter how cold she was about such matters. A millennium of suffering is hard to face for anyone, and he knew all too well about that sort of thing, since he knew Tiamat, though in the Dragoness's case, it was almost 2 millennia. Finally, the swan began to mobilize, causing Issei to become slightly excited. He had never participated in an event as such, but he always saw some that were shown on TV, and they seemed entertaining. The brown-haired man waited anxiously until finally the exit of the cave began to come into view. Out of nowhere, numerous lights came on, completely blinding the protagonist for a few seconds. Issei opened his eyes wide as he felt a large blizzard run through his hair. His eyes finally adjusted to the hanging lights at the same time as numerous fireworks began to burst in the sky just above the castle, giving a mind-blowing colorful image. "Amazing," was all he could think, watching the play of lights with wide eyes. His attention was pulled elsewhere when he felt Penemu tug on his sleeve shyly. Issei turned to look at her, and in that single moment, he had felt that time had stopped. Penemu's smile. Her hair fluttering with complete freedom. Her crimson eyes shining brightly in the evening light with great joy. She was simply beautiful. They both intertwined their hands without even realizing it, letting themselves be totally carried away by the beautiful moment they were living right now. Instead of paying attention to the fireworks, they were looking at each other at all times, as if one was the most precious attraction in sight for the other. They both only wished that this precious moment would last forever. Line jump. "It's been a lot of fun," Penemu stated with a small smile. Issei just nodded in complete agreement as they walked up the stairs together. They were still holding hands. By now, they should have realized it, but it seemed that neither of them felt uncomfortable at the other's touch. In fact, they both felt really good about it. Since the party was still going on, the vast majority of the fallen were outside, so they didn't run into any of them. Finally, they both stopped in front of Penemu's room. "Tomorrow afternoon I would like to start making preparations for your training. I need to talk to Tiamat and Tannen, so I'll come by after lunch," Cadre commented, receiving a nod from Issei. Just as the protagonist was about to say goodbye, he could feel Penemu tighten her grip on his hand even more. "I'd like you to stay with me another night, please." Penemu lowered her head slightly with a slight blush, surprising Issei by the proposal. "I'd love to," the protagonist commented, receiving a smile from the cadre. Issei sat on the bed and looked away in slight discomfort as he listened as Penemu began to remove her clothes. "I'd like to go together next year as well," cadre commented, causing Issei to look sideways at her for a second. He could see Penemu's bare back as she pulled on her white pajamas while wearing only black lace panties. "Why yes," he stammered, unable to help but blush and curse himself for turning his gaze away without thinking it through. "Why are you getting nervous?" Penemu asked with a hint of amusement, finishing putting on her pajamas and sitting down on the bed. Issei took this as the green light to turn his gaze. "Sorry, I can't help it," commented the protagonist as he rubbed his cheek with a finger. "Just kidding," Cadre said with a teasing tone, causing Issei to deliver a small pout. Without even giving him time to reproach her, Penemu pounced on him, giving him a big hug. She snuggled into Issei instantly, then kissed him on the cheek. "This day has been magnificent," Cadre commented, cupping him by the cheeks and staring at him. "I owe it all to you. That's why tonight I won't let you go. Tonight, it will be just the two of us," she concluded, giving him another tight hug, this time wrapping her arms around his neck and squeezing him lovingly. Their legs were soon entwined together, making Penemu's feet move with great happiness. "I don't plan on going anywhere," Issei replied, reciprocating the embrace instantly, at the same time taking the opportunity to stroke her hair. Sensing this, Penemu began to caress Issei's back with her hands. They both felt incredible with such direct touch. After all, that somewhat indiscreet contact made their breasts even hotter than they already were before. They knew that this heat was just a sensation, that it wasn't real. But that sensation of their breasts burning with every loving feeling felt too cool to give up. It was so great, they could perfectly feel each other's heartbeat slowly start to speed up because of all the conflicting emotions. Yes, a really comforting feeling. A unique sensation. A unique sensation which can only be produced by that special person. Line jump. After having slept with her for 2 days, Issei began to think that he could get used to this. After all, it was quite nice to sleep next to the fall, and it was something he couldn't deny. In fact, it was so much so that they both woke up quite early and still stayed in bed as they felt too good to get up. Besides, the fact that their bodies always dawned so close together didn't help them feel like getting up either. Unfortunately for both of them, duty always called sooner or later. Penemu had to get up reluctantly to continue with her work that she had left a little bit behind yesterday, while Issei decided to take a little walk with Azazel, who was still at Grigori. The aforementioned offered him a tour of the entire castle. Issei already had a good image of Azazel from the time he defended him from the other cadres, but he managed to be even more impressed by the routine and informal, even somewhat elevated, chats he sometimes made. At the moment he didn't like him as much as Penemu, but he proved to be a pleasant enough phone. The fact that he would be the one to command the Gremory group from now on only made him think that they would probably become close friends in the future. When the long talk with Azazel was over, Issei went to Penemu, seeing that she was already waiting for him to do the only cooking practice they could do in a long time. And so, that's how they got to this situation. A somewhat delicate situation for Penemu. The fallen tried to put a couple of potatoes in a pit that hadn't even boiled the water yet, causing the protagonist to stop her instantly. "You have to boil the water first," he commented quickly, then looked back to the pan. "The oil has already been steaming for several minutes, you have to hurry to put the meat in, unless you want to die of food poisoning." The protagonist quickly stopped her again. "Don't do it with your wet hands. You could set the whole damn kitchen on fire," he exclaimed in great fright. Penemu placed her hand on her chest instantly, as a cold sweat and a look that reflected too much unease glimmered on her face. Luckily for her, Issei had caught her expression instantly. "She's being completely overwhelmed," the protagonist thought, then shook his head with a small smile. Penemu blinked in slight confusion as Issei landed behind her. The fall looked at him intently, indicating that she was looking for an answer. That answer came in the form of a small whimper from her as Issei attached to her body and took both of her hands, beginning to show her the way she should go. Penemu watched every movement with a huge blush, which grew more and more intense as she felt Issei's breath catch on her neck. Issei began to control her as if she were a robot, putting everything in order. The only thing left to do was to put the pot on the fire. Unfortunately, Penemu got carried away by the overwhelming situation, causing her hands to slip on the handles, and as a result, the pot fell to the ground and wet the two of them a little. Sorry." Penemu apologized, quickly bending down to pick up the pot. "Don't worry about it. You need to relax," commented the protagonist as he did the same. Their hand collided against the same handle, causing them both to raise their heads to look at the other. That alone triggered a somewhat delirious situation for both of them. As they raised their heads, they were both immensely surprised to hold each other close. Very close. In fact, they were so close that their lips were brushing. A small blush appeared on both of their faces as they seemed unable to stop staring deeply at each other. Instead of separating, they both continued to crouch in exactly the same position, without making any movement. Somehow, their hands holding the hole ended up intertwining. Silence graced the room as Penemu slowly closed her eyes, while that small blush on her face intensified in time with the increase of her heartbeat. "Eyes, I'll be right back. Remember, we still have 27 days to rebuild the academy." Azazel's voice coming from outside the kitchen caused them both to awaken from their trance. They quickly got up and put the pot back in its place. "Don't worry," shouted Issei, approaching the door. "We'll make us something to eat here and come back." Penemu just deigned to fill the pot without saying a word. She touched her lips for a short second, then continued normally. "So you celebrated the anniversary of the fallen together with Penemu, huh?" Tannen commented, looking at a happy Issei. "I'm glad you were able to distract yourself a bit these days." The dragon, who was now in his human form, looked at the gauntlet. "Have you been having fun too, Drake?" he asked, sketching a smirk on his face. "You know well I don't have time to spare for that sort of thing. I've simply been sleeping throughout the day," the dragon commented matter-of-factly, causing a bead of nervous sweat to decorate his wearer's head. "Does that mean sleeping all day is some kind of work?" he asked. "By the way, where's Tiamat?" Issei deflected the topic, causing Tannen to turn slightly serious. She wanted to talk a couple of things over with Penemu. "Let's just say she's not in a very good mood," the dragon commented, pondering whether he should be the one to tell him about the training or leave it to Penemu. That could be a problem," commented the protagonist with slight concern. "Don't worry," Tannen stated instantly. I don't think it's serious enough that she's going to kill her, he commented, only to have a small bead of sweat show on his face. I think. Thanks for not worrying me. Issei exclaimed in a sarcastic way with his eyes rolling. In the same forest, next to the stream. Tiamat grabbed Penelope by the neck and yanked her hard against a tree, lifting her into the air as she glared at her with palpable fury in her eyes. Did you think I would go along with a plan that would risk Issei's life? She hissed with slight venom in her voice. Have you gone mad? Penelope just looked at her without flinching a hair, even though she was practically being hanged. Crazy is to think that Issei can become very strong in just a month to be able to face the hacker Yuku. Hearing this, Tiamat couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. I know his power very well, and also his ambitions. Now that he knows about Issei's existence, it won't be long before he comes to face him. The fall narrowed her eyes. And you know very well that he won't want you to save his skin forever. Penelope finally closed her eyes calmly. If it were a month of halfway conventional training, Issei would accomplish nothing. What are you getting at with all this talk? Tiamat asked, beginning to grow impatient. Penelope opened her eyes, and a glint graced her gaze. What I'm getting at is that you're too flexible. Tiamat couldn't help but look at her with great strangeness at her words. Finally, Penelope ended up giving a small sigh, at the same time softening her gaze. Listen to me well, I am also very fond of Issei. For that very reason I know that what's best for him won't be achieved overnight, but at least we can make the process faster if we use extreme methods. Penelope closed her eyes deeply, at the same time her voice cracked slightly. I'll say it again, I don't want to hurt him and I don't want him to hurt himself. But this is the only way. Tiamat was never a woman to be swayed by the words of others, but she had to say that on this occasion she was genuinely impressed. After a few seconds of pondering, the dragoness finally let go of the fallen's neck, causing the fallen to look at her intently. Tiamat shared her gaze, causing a few seconds of silence adorned by the sound of the stream to fill the atmosphere. Would you promise me that nothing bad will happen to him? Tiamat's question caused Penelope to stare her straight in the eye. I can promise you that he won't die. She replied, making the dragoness share her gaze. Finally, Tiamat gave a small sigh, then created a magic circle and drew her light blue sword, immediately throwing it at Penelope. The fall caught the sword with slight astonishment at the dragoness's attitude. Very well, I trust you. Tiamat commented, leaning against a tree as she folded her arms. Besides, I think you're right about Issei's future as well. The dragoness couldn't help but look up at the sky with a very worried look. Most likely, many dangers await him. Tiamat lowered her gaze, having remembered something Penelope had said. By the way, you said you really cared about Issei, she commented, then narrowed her eyes slightly in suspicion. What happened these past few days? Penelope could only avert her gaze for a second, causing Tiamat to narrow her eyes even more. Finally, Le Cadre sighed in defeat. To be honest with you, you're not the only one who has special feelings for Issei anymore. She commented, causing Tiamat to widen her eyes at the response. He was so stubborn and also so loving. A small smile appeared on her face after remembering. I just couldn't help myself. For every word he said to me, I felt like my whole body was slowly going crazy. It was a very strange feeling, but very pleasant at the same time. A small blush appeared on Penelope's face, then she lowered her head as she clasped her hands together. I don't know how to explain it. Simply put, it was a unique feeling. Tiamat finished her sentence, causing the cadre to look at her in surprise. At least you didn't take so long to accept it. The dragoness commented with a small smile on her face. You're not angry? Penelope asked her with much astonishment, as the dragoness's very carefree attitude didn't fit her character at all. Angry? Tiamat couldn't help but blink a couple of times. Why would I be angry? Well, it's quite simple, Penelope commented, rubbing her hair. After all, I just said we're in love with the same man. Oh, I get it, Tiamat commented, then looking up at the sky with a small smile. I think for a small part, that reaction is because polygamy is not frowned upon among dragons. Her smile twisted into a serious look, at the same time her eyes reflected some pain. Though, as I said, it would only be a small part of the cause. Hearing this, Penelope couldn't help but look at her with even more attention. Tiamat lowered her gaze, closing her eyes as she pondered whether she should tell her or not. Finally, she opened her eyes, giving her a great intimacy through her gaze that was even able to make Penelope a little tense. I don't want to tell anyone else about this, and it's not like I like talking about it either. But Tiamat softened her gaze, giving her a small smile. I think you should know. After all, I've considered you my friend for a while now. This caused Penelope to widen her eyes at the confidence the dragoness demonstrated towards her. Before you continue, I want to promise you something else. Hearing Penelope's proposal, Tiamat could only look at her rather intrigued. I promise you won't regret opening up to me, friend. She promised, sketching a smile. Tiamat was a bit surprised at her words, though it didn't take her long to answer that smile back. I must admit, that makes me more at ease, the dragoness commented, then turning a bit serious. Our species does not get carried away by its feelings as if nothing. The reality is that our species is very different from the others, as we have the ability to feel 10 times more than what you feel. Tiamat raised her gaze, watching as the clouds moved. That means that if we feel happiness, we feel it 10 times more. If we feel hatred, we feel it 10 times as much, and if we feel sadness, we feel it 10 times more. Penemu could tell as she paused slightly on the last one, indicating that it was the sore point. Far from helping dragons, this characteristic is considered their only weakness. Hatred clouds the mind of any dragon, causing them to become completely irrational more often than not. Even I had been completely consumed by this feeling before I met Issei. Tiamat lowered her gaze, staring at her. But before that, there was another emotion that completely consumed me. Sadness. Tiamat clenched her fist slightly after saying the word. That is, without a doubt, the worst negative emotion a dragon can have. Thanks to it, it's how that ambiguous ending you use comes about. The fall of the dragon, Penemu commented, receiving a nod from Tiamat. Everyone knows that I suffered the fall of the dragon, and thanks to Drake I was able to recover before I died. But, what they don't know, is that the traumas caused because of that mental illness never go away. Hearing this, Penemu couldn't help but look at Tiamat with great empathy. The fall of the dragon has only left me with insecurity, and when Drake left, that insecurity turned into hatred. And when I met Issei, Tiamat lowered her gaze sadly. That hatred turned into fear. Fear? Penemu couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at the last. But, it's illogical for a woman as beautiful as you to be afraid of having a relationship with Issei. If I'm so beautiful, why did they both abandon me? Tiamat shouted, causing Penemu to be immensely surprised after her outburst. If I confess to Issei, I'm afraid he won't love me like that. Tiamat finally raised her gaze, giving a small sigh. That's why I prefer things to stay like this. I feel really happy with him the way things are now. Also, it makes me really happy to see that he's making progress, and he's always smiling. Tiamat put a hand to her chest, looking at Penemu with great seriousness. That's why I'm willing even to find a woman who is worthwhile and will make him happy and succeed in healing his heart. I don't intend to be selfish if I don't even dare to confess. I simply want him to be happy because I know that if he is happy, I am happy too. The dragoness lowered her gaze, giving a small snort. The only bad thing will be that we won't be able to sleep together anymore. Penemu placed both hands on her hips after hearing the story. Would you really feel happy like that? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Tiamat simply scoffed, then smiled. I'm not an idiot. I know that seeing her with another woman and him not being with me would affect me quite a bit. A very serious look graced the dragoness's gaze. But I am no one to decide the happiness of others. He taught me that very well. I don't intend to be selfish again on a mere whim of mine. Especially if it is that I truly love him, and I do. That's why I wish the best for him, even if I'm not the one by his side. Penemu couldn't help but look at her in utter amazement, then close his eyes with a smile. You are truly admirable. Penemu stared at her, pointing at herself. But, I want you to know that I will not be that woman who will be by your side. Hearing this, Tiamat couldn't help but look at her with great confusion. Why? The dragoness asked, unable to understand her. Penemu turned away, slowly frowning. The couple of images covered in blood and different screams pounded in her mind, and at the end of them all Udmiel appeared. I'm not afraid to confess, or anything like that. Penemu clenched her fists tightly, then lowered her gaze. But, I don't deserve to love, let alone deserve to be loved, after all the atrocities I've committed throughout my life as a fallen. Penemu turned away, giving the dragoness a very determined look. That is why I will also help you in that quest in any way I can. A small smile appeared on her face. After all, I love him very much too, and that's why I want to see that ghost of his past disappear once and for all. The foal raised her hand, sketching a small smile. Tiamat shook it practically instantly, smiling back. By the way, do you know where to start yet? Penemu asked, sketching a somewhat competitive smile. I've been doing research these days. Human women are not an option because of their short lifespan. What has been very interesting is about the Valkyries. They are in search of a husband until before they are physically 25 years old. Maybe one of them could be the right one. Obviously that doesn't mean we should force the situation. We just need to have an idea of which women might really want him. Remember, he's the Red Dragon Emperor, and that attracts a lot of larvae. Tiamat raised her gaze, thinking carefully. Gabriel, the future queen of the Valkyries, Ayaka, they're all quite respectable women, and I think they'd really be in love with Issei if they tried to approach him with that goal in mind. Like Ria's Gremory and her maidservants. Penemu's question caused a bored look to grace the dragoness's face. No, not those brats. Tiamat made her opinion clear, indicating that they should guard Issei's safety against those kinds of women, just in case. A few minutes later. The two men's nerves dissipated when they saw the two women arrive. Issei. Tiamat quickly ran to him to enclose him in a bear hug. "I missed you so much." The dragoness exclaimed as she rubbed her cheek against Issei's with much joy, making the protagonist slightly confused, though he didn't hesitate to respond the hug. Issei looked at Tannen with a face that said she wasn't annoyed. Tannen simply bowed his shoulders, indicating that he had no idea what had happened. Penemu landed next to the dragon, making one of her robes appear through a magical circlet. "We have Tiamat's sword and the robe. It's all set to start tomorrow." Hearing this, the atmosphere became somewhat tense. Even Tiamat stopped rubbing her cheek against Issei's. The protagonist didn't understand what was going on, though Penemu quickly explained. "For tomorrow, you will have to use this robe and this sword for your training. It will be a total of 800 repetitions of different exercises, which as you overcome them will increase in difficulty. The only one that will not change and will have a higher number will be the sword with a total of 2000 daily repetitions." The 2000 Issei couldn't help but think in complete disbelief. But he quickly calmed down after remembering that when he could barely lift Tiamat's sword, he still couldn't even awaken his balance breaker. To conclude, you will have a little training with Tannen. The Fall looked at the dragon. "We still haven't agreed on which one it will be, but by tomorrow it will be all set." Penemu looked seriously at the protagonist. "Be sure to enjoy this day." Issei quickly nodded, then sat down next to Tiamat as they began to talk about what he had done in Grigori. The dragoness had to admit that she felt a little envious, but still had to agree that she was very happy for both of them. And so the hours went by, where Tiamat finally took off from Issei to go take a bath at the Haidu residence, while Penemu had been working all afternoon until she disappeared to take a bath in the stream. Therefore, Tannen and Issei were left alone. "I must admit that you've made good progress despite being a reincarnated demon, Securite." Issei frowned slightly at the nickname, though he quickly downplayed it. "Now that I wonder why our reincarnated demons called that name." Hearing the question, Tannen couldn't help but look at him in slight astonishment. "I must admit, that's a good question," he commented, giving her a small smile as he rested his hand on his chin. "It's not that demons say it is a racist way to those humans turned demons. It's just that there really is a big difference between them." Hearing this, Issei paid special attention to him. A reincarnated demon is recognized as such, as it returns from the dead bearing a demonic body, but its soul is still human. Tannen drew a small picture on the floor of a fallen angel and other images he didn't understand. Any race can transform into a reincarnated demon. But if you are a fallen angel, your soul will remain that of a fallen angel. If you are a dragon, your soul will remain that of a dragon. Tannen waved his hand, indicating that the list went on and on. What really lies in how powerful that makes it a reincarnated demon is not its container, but its contents. As is the case with humans with sacred gears or any other entity that has a soul equivalent or superior to that of a demon. Finally, Tannen drew a picture on the back, causing Issei to look at it intently. But where do such souls originate? All we know is that they are generated just like a star. Everything comes through energy, and this energy is transformed into power. The souls of the dragon gods are the most powerful, and at the same time, the most dangerous. "Wait a minute," Issei interrupted him, causing the dragon to stare at him. "So, who was it that concentrated that enormous amount of power to create those kinds of souls?" Well, Tannen rubbed his hair, thinking carefully. "God created humans and angels, which you may now also know some as demons and fallen angels. That alone gives us to think that someone created Great Red, who was the first supernatural being to exist in this world." Tannen finally gave a small sigh, then glared at him. "Still, we are just like humans on the subject of finding the origin of everything. We simply can't find that answer, and even most likely that entity is still generating very powerful souls today, but on other worlds." Tannen finally erased all the drawings, throwing the stick away. The universe is infinite, and that makes our questions infinite as well. Therefore, it will be impossible to find a clear answer to our origin. We can only thank our creator for letting us exist. Issei ruffled his hair. "How complicated?" the protagonist exclaimed, causing Tannen to laugh loudly. "So, how is it that souls are generated when procreating?" "That's another one of those things that have no answers," was Tannen's simple reply. "We simply believe that the substance of those two souls come together to create a new one. Though it is only a mere assumption." The dragon's gaze hardened a bit after remembering one thing. After all, there have been some exceptions to that rule throughout history. Such as, for example, humans with the souls of supernatural beings. Line jump. "Is everyone ready?" Penemu asked Tannen and Tiamat, receiving a nod from both of them. Issei just looked at them quizzically. "Why do they have to be ready?" "I won't be around all the time because of work issues. They'll make sure nothing goes wrong during your training." Hearing the answer, the protagonist couldn't help but think that perhaps Penemu was exaggerating a bit. "Put it on," the cadre commented, tossing the robe into his hands. Seeing this, Issei quickly activated his balance breaker and caught it with both of his hands, causing a small crater to rise up at his feet. It's heavy, but not as heavy as I thought, Issei thought as he put it on. Before we begin, I must warn you that there are two rules. Commented the cadre, stabbing Tiamat's sword into the ground. The first is that you may not use any kind of magic. Issei just nodded, not seeing much of a problem with the matter. A somewhat tense atmosphere arose as Penemu narrowed her eyes. The second is that you can't use your sacred gear at any time. Hearing this, Issei could feel everything around him turn black. Had he heard correctly? If he didn't wear the armor, there was no way he could stand upright with that robe on. An awkward silence arose between the two, which was broken by Penemu as she raised an eyebrow. What are you waiting for to take off the balance breaker? Is that some kind of joke? Issei asked with a rather hesitant smile as a cold sweat began to adorn his face. Penemu could only raise her eyebrow even more at the question. Do I have the face to make jokes? Oh, of course not, commented the protagonist with great nervousness. Issei gave a big sigh, psyching himself up for what was about to happen. The protagonist raised both fists, only to have the characteristic crimson glow cover him afterwards, only to fall face first to the ground as the weight of the robe took its toll on him. Issei managed to stand up slowly, only to then blink in complete shock after feeling how all his movements were extremely limited. Would he really have to do 800 repetitions with this? And better not even think about the 2000 repetitions with Tiamat's sword. You have an hour and a half to complete each exercise. If you don't make it, you move on to the next. Cadre commented, narrowing her eyes slightly. Is that clear? Issei nodded quickly. The last training you will do will be with Tannen. You will have to dodge or block all of his attacks in the next half hour, using the robe, of course. Wait, will it be the last? The young man exclaimed in complete disbelief. I'll barely be able to move because of the wear and tear. That's the idea. Penemu's solemn comment only caused a depressing aura to surround the protagonist. If you manage to complete the training in the remaining 26 days, I'll teach you a new trick of your sacred gear. Hearing this, Issei couldn't help but raise his gaze with much curiosity. But, do I really have to do all that? The brown-haired man asked, still in disbelief. Seeing this, Penemu felt a bit of empathy for her future lover. The first 2 weeks we extended control over your sacred gear and it was just that. Your strength barely increased a bit. Now, you need to perform some deadly training on your body so that you're finally ready to receive the full power of the balance breaker. I know it's crazy, but you can't expect to become much stronger from 1 month to the next using a simple and risk-free method, you know. Hearing this, Issei became slightly serious. It would only be 1 month and that's what he was looking for with his training. To become much stronger. Simply put, he can't waste such an opportunity. Very well. Issei stared at her, denoting a great fire in his eyes. Let us begin. Hearing this, Penemu was not the only one to smile as Tiamat and Tannen shared her expression. The unfolding of the training begins. Every 3 dots indicates a small time skip lapse. 128, 129. Issei gritted his teeth hard for each abdominal, keeping count to perfection. In the distance, Penemu was watching him as she signed a couple of papers. 220, 221. Issei was counting the number of repetitions as he could while keeping his balance so as not to fall down as he was upside down doing somewhat extreme push-ups. Sweat was pouring down to the floor in an extreme manner, looking like he wasn't going to last long without water. This time, Tannen was watching him from the top of a tree, seeing that so far so good. For the moment. 32, 33. The protagonist was doing normal push-ups. Even so, his expression and the color of his face indicated that he was not far from reaching his limit. Tiamat was sitting next to him with a worried look on her face, hoping that nothing would happen to her beloved. 758. A scream escaped his throat, dropping the sword to the ground as he tried to catch his breath. He looked down at his hands, realizing they had begun to bleed. Tannen looked at Penemu, who showed him that she only had 1 phoenix tear, so they should save it for a more critical moment. The dragon sweat slightly, but nodded, knowing he was right. Issei had his gaze very intent in the light of the night, though his shivering body and expression that was also in the same condition did not help to keep that willpower expelled through his eyes. Basically, his body was at the end of its limits and now he had to face Tannen. He had already done it quite a few times since he started this part of the training. Therefore, he was already used to his movements. Another thing was whether his body would respond properly when he wanted to move. The protagonist watched as Tannen disappeared from his sight, then quickly glanced behind him, seeing just in time as the dragon raised one of his fingers to then throw a small ball of magical power that was twice as big as a soccer ball. Anyone would have jumped backwards to dodge it, but as Issei could barely move, he could only tilt his body backwards, causing the ball to pass him just inches away. Tannen again moved out of place at a terrible speed, attacking him again. Issei was forced to use his remaining strength to leap and then spread his wings. He tried to stay in the air, but it only took him a second to fall flatly to the ground, generating a huge crater. It wasn't that he had fallen because of an attack by Tannen. He had been knocked down by his own weight. 470, 471. Issei gritted his teeth tightly as he did each repetition. This time, he found himself doing normal one-handed push-ups, indicating that he had already completed the 800 of the first challenge. The battle against Tannen had the same result as always. But the dragon got an immense surprise when Issei didn't stay crashed in the crater and managed to rise into the air just in time to dodge his attack. Even so, the dragon didn't get caught up in the moment and quickly attacked the protagonist through the air. Issei was even able to stay in the air even though his whole body was shaking. The young man watched helplessly as the attack approached at great speed, dodging it by the skin of his teeth, only being able to make a millimeter movement. Tannen's attacks began to turn into an intense flurry coming from everywhere, making Issei move as best he could, as if he were a person in a wheelchair, playing a game of dodgeball against 10 experts. On one of the many balls, Issei couldn't help but widen his eyes in surprise, being hit squarely and sending him to the ground while spitting out a large amount of blood. Tannen quickly went down to attend to him, as did Tiamat and Penemu. "Aig!" Issei screamed loudly as both of his hands were shaking intensely. He was doing two-handed push-ups again, but this time there was Penemu sitting on his back while wearing the ultra-heavy robe. Finally, Issei's arms shook even more intensely as he continued to scream until they finally gave up, at the same time vomiting a large amount of blood. 548, 549. This time, Issei was doing a pair of sit-ups while bound in a magic circle upside down, holding Tiamat's sword with both of his hands. Penemu was sitting behind him, sitting comfortably in a chair while reading a book. The cadre raised her gaze for a second, seeing that every time Issei went down, his upper back was brushed by the tip of his katana, indicating that if he didn't support his own weight, he was going to end up pierced by it. 1400 Issei's swords were slow, but steady. 1401. A completely compassed look remained on his face, while one could see how his torso was in full view, as his robe was open. 1402. For every movement of his hands, a large amount of beads of sweat shot out. Thanks to his bare chest, it could be seen how numerous bandages covered his torso, as well as his hands and his forehead. Certain scars could also be visualized, which were probably healed by Tiamat's healing ability, but it was not enough to remove the mark. Besides that, it could also be witnessed that his physique had started to grow even more these days. Even, his lean muscles had been marked to such an extent that there was no longer a hint of fat, revealing a perfect torso, as well as his arms and legs. 599, 600. Issei was again doing the push-ups, though this time Penemu was standing on his feet reading a book, making the weight he must bear double. 771, 772. Issei was going at an astonishingly fast pace while gritting his teeth tightly. It was rather surprising, since he was doing one-handed push-ups and he had Penemu sitting on his back. The chestnut was giving little yelps each time he gave different thrusts at a decent pace, despite the fact that he was very close to finishing. Finally, Issei lowered his sword and began to breathe heavily as a large amount of sweat poured down his face. His eyes shone brightly, causing him to let out a great scream. Tiamat had rarely been surprised in her life, but this situation warranted it as the speed Issei handled with each swing had increased quite a bit, making it so that even a normal person could not clearly distinguish the movements. 788, 789. Issei's calm look made a perfect contrast to the pace he was going at a good speed. Meanwhile, Penemu was looking at him with slight surprise as he was doing one-handed headstand push-ups, having her standing on his feet, and it didn't seem to affect him too much. 798. Issei shouted loudly from the killer sit-ups she was doing. 799. He shouted again with great effort, and when he tried to climb back up, his body shook intensely and he dropped onto the katana. Penemu got up practically instantly when he saw the katana pierce his collarbone smoothly, even piercing his body in the process. Such pain would be unbearable for anyone, but Issei wasn't just anyone. Penemu couldn't help but blink in complete shock when he saw how Issei even tried to get up. Issei clenched his teeth tightly and used all his remaining strength. 800. He shouted at the top of his lungs, just in time for Penemu to pull back the katana and catch him in her arms. Issei watched in horror as a ball of magic headed straight for him. He had already completed all the series and their respective repetitions, but one of them had recently left deep damage to his collarbone that Tiamat could not fully heal. He only had this one test left to finish and he wasn't going to let the opportunity pass him by so easily. He could barely move, but the 30 minutes were almost up and he wasn't going to let that silly injury take away his chance. Issei raised both of his hands towards the attack, stopping it in its tracks. Tannen couldn't help but blink in great surprise at what she witnessed. Issei's arms shook as he tried to block the attack. The protagonist gritted his teeth hard as he felt the sting of his collarbone, causing his bandages to start bleeding. He took a couple of steps back for what seemed like the end. Finally, Issei blinked with great resolve and widened his eyes to the max. "Ai!" Issei gave a great shout at the same time as he began to advance against the attack, causing a huge glow to rise into the air, at the same time a small explosion could be glimpsed in the demonic forest. The dust slowly dissipated, leaving a staggering figure in place. All of Issei's wounds became visible, but that didn't seem to matter to him at the moment. The only thing that mattered to him was the sound of the clock, indicating that the ordeal was finally over. After 25 long days. He had finally made it. Issei's legs trembled and gave in to the soothing sound, causing him to fall backwards with a thud. Issei felt consciousness begin to leave his body, but saw just in time as a figure landed in front of him, looking down on him from above. "Is that all you can do, Issei?" Tannen asked, revealing that he had finally recognized him. Issei couldn't help but be immensely surprised, so he quickly complied with his expectations. The protagonist forced himself up from the ground as he grabbed his collarbone and trembled intensely. But more importantly, he had stood up, indicating to the dragon that there was still much more for him to observe. Issei began to see everything very blurry. The pain and exhaustion were killing him at that moment. Having been training to death for so many days was a somewhat traumatic experience for him, even for someone of his caliber who loved to train so much. He only hoped that he wouldn't have to go through a similar ordeal in a long time. Issei could feel his consciousness fading, but he was able to continue standing as Penemu leaned on his back, supporting him to keep him upright. He could hear the cadre mention certain words with ill humor towards Tannen that were inaudible to him. All he knew was that the dragon laughed loudly for some reason. Knowing Tannen, she was surely reprimanding him. Finally, he could see how a small vial was brought to his lips, drinking that substance that had a strange taste. As if it were a somewhat salty raindrop. Practically within a second, Issei regained all his senses and widened his eyes to the max after feeling his energy and wounds heal completely. What was? Issei turned around instantly, blushing slightly at the sight of Penemu standing inches from his face. The cadre simply sketched a small smile as she held up the vial that previously contained Phoenix's tear. "I thought you'd run out of those," thought the protagonist aloud, blinking several times. "I saved one for when this time came," Penemu commented, stepping even closer and getting Issei slightly nervous. "I knew the damage would increase exponentially in the last stretch. That's why I wanted to make sure you healed instantly after finishing the training." Issei blinked again several times. "Finish it." He widened his eyes slightly, beginning to take in that it was all over. "That means I made it." "You made it." Penemu replied placidly, then enclosed him in a tender embrace that surprised the protagonist. "Congratulations." Issei could only shake internally as he remembered the hell he had gone through for the entire month. It had been a complete nightmare, and the fact that he never gave up and kept going until he finally completed it brought the emotions to the surface, which intensified when he was hugged by the beautiful cadre. Issei slowly answered the hug as he felt tears threaten to well up in his eyes. "Thank you so much." The protagonist thanked, hugging her tightly. This caused an inevitable smile to generate on Penemu's face after feeling Issei convey his happiness to her. "To be honest, I never thought you'd ever get to complete the training," Tannen commented, causing them both to look at him. "Damn. You even completed it a day earlier than estimated." The dragon leaned against a tree, smiling a big smile. "I'm proud of you, Brett. I don't think you have any idea yet how difficult it was to complete this training having a level so far below." Tannen couldn't help but narrow his eyes with a mysterious look. "You have quite an interesting bearer, Drake." "I knew the tour would be very interesting from the moment we made that promise. When we first met," the dragon commented from the gauntlet, causing Penemu and Issei to break apart. "Yet you always managed to break my expectations. Not only through your strength and mentality, you also proved it through your heart." Drake's voice sounded very proud. "I've never felt so august with a bearer, and that's because of your personality. Drake Issei couldn't help but feel amazed by the words of his companion and also one of his best friends. "You're absolutely right." Tannen nodded, then handed him a smile. "You've even accomplished the impossible. You managed to get close to the Ice Queen and melt her with your words. You were also able to gain a strong unconditional friendship with a cadre who would not allow anyone to get sentimentally close to her since her tragedy." Finally, the dragon closed his eyes with a small sneer. "You're a very good person, Issei." Hearing this, Penemu couldn't help but turn slightly serious. He's right, but don't let. I won't let that kindness blind me. The protagonist commented, making the cadre visibly relieved. Tiamat had told me about this before. After my fight against Kakabiel, I know well how to tell the difference between people who deserve a second chance and those who don't, he commented, clenching his fist slightly after remembering everything that had happened. I'm quite relieved that you know that, cadre commented, then looking at him very seriously. But also remember that those people won't always try to be the main function. The cadre narrowed her eyes slightly, causing Issei to look at her intently. The most troublesome ones, they are always the ones who move in the shadows. Meanwhile, at Kuo Academy. The figure of a rather recognizable woman opened the bars of the academy through the darkness, stepping into the compliment as she gave a small sigh. They make me go at this time of night, Tiamat thought, having a small flashback. Sorry to bother you, but I need you to take a box to the occult club. Azazel's voice echoed through a small magic circle. I'm too busy to go, and I don't feel like bothering Surziches with his stuff. They're materials from the boys that will be used next week. Tiamat looked at the enormous amount of furniture outside the huge rebuilt building, indicating that only a few final preparations were needed to enable classes again. The dragoness went straight towards the occult club, giving a small yawn as she entered the facility. She couldn't help but look at the place with some curiosity, as she had never before seen the place where Issei and the others usually gathered. She wandered around the facility for a bit until she finally stumbled upon something strange. Is that door sealed? The dragoness wondered, only to squint with great suspicion. Tiamat set the box aside and slowly approached, resting her hand on the various chains and ribbons, not to mention the magical circles that contained the room, both inside and out. Tiamat blinked in slight amazement after feeling a fiber of energy from the other side. Though said energy was something very unusual. How strange the power felt in here is quite recognizable. But, at the same time, it's very different, she couldn't help but think, only to be distracted by hearing a book sticking out of the box fall to the floor. Tiamat's eyes widened in utter amazement when she saw what it was, and she quickly moved to pick it up. She fixed her gaze intently on the first page, noting that it wasn't just a book, it was an album. A photo album. The photo album of Issei. Tiamat couldn't help but smile sweetly as she flipped through each photo, watching Issei slowly grow up. Each photo was taken in a different year. His growing smile disappeared when he realized that the photos were very sparse, and since the photo he had with a girl who looked like a boy, he had stopped smiling. Tiamat turned to the next page, seeing that the pages were blank. There were only 11 photos, each representing a birthday. So it was certainly a bit odd that he didn't have at least 6 more pictures. For obvious reasons, this made Tiamat angry, as it was very obvious that he seemed to have spent a rather lonely life, where not even his parents had accompanied him. Before she closed the album, she witnessed how the thickness on the next page was different. She didn't hesitate for a second to turn the page, only to get a surprise. A rather pleasant surprise. My 14 years. Thank you very much, friends. Below the photo, she had written those words, where she could see how Issei was sharing a barbecue in the park, quite familiar to her. 2 people close to his age were accompanying him, hugging him tightly by the neck while holding a huge toothy smile on their faces. She could not at first make them out, but as she went through photo by photo, year by year, she could quickly begin to recognize them. Finally, she came to the conclusion on the last photo, where she could see how the protagonist was celebrating his 17th birthday, again with another barbecue, as usual. And of course, those 2 men were there again. Thank you very much, Mitsuda and Motohama. It's those 2, Tiamat couldn't help but think with slight astonishment. Now she could understand why Issei always spoke so highly of the 2 of them whenever he had the chance. After all, they had been the only ones who had been around for the most important moments in her life, at a certain point. Tiamat turned the page, resting her hand on the empty spot earnestly, then quirked a rather loving little smile. Just wait. The next day. Penemu was doing the paperwork as usual. The wooden table was already somewhat deteriorated from being in the forest for a month and a half, but that wasn't of much consequence, as the time there was about to end. Good morning. Issei exclaimed with a big yawn, receiving a quizzical look from the cadre. Good morning, why are you still wearing your robe? She asked, causing Issei to look down at himself. It's no longer necessary. She commented to him in a sweet voice, and Issei could only smile at her. You're right. Issei took off his black robe, leaving it on the floor, causing everything to give a little shake. The protagonist looked down at himself in utter amazement, wiggling his arms and legs. Amazing, I feel like I'm floating. It's only natural. Penemu explained, signing one last piece of paper then rising from his seat. Your body weight has dropped exponentially. Your body is much stronger now than it was a month ago. On top of that, the armor control not only helped you with that, but also, as you've been brushing against your magic limits all the time, your reserves have increased to be able to adapt on those days. My magic reserves have increased. Issei wondered with great happiness. How much have they? Considering your magic reserves are almost low, and you were over 2 weeks over demanding them, Penemu put her hand to her chin, thinking carefully. I think they're twice as big now. She finally found the answer, causing Issei's eyes to widen in overdrive. Twice as big as before? He shouted, completely incredulous. It's not as much as it seems. She commented quickly, causing Issei to visibly deflate. Remember that your magic reserves are ridiculously low. Now, we could say they're quite low. Penemu held up a finger. It's only gone up by 1 level. I see, the young man commented as he felt a depressive aura begin to surround him. It's not to be disappointed. Penemu commented quickly, sketching a small smile. With all the progress you've made now, I'm sure you'll be able to maintain the armor a great deal of time. Remember that the boosted gear is responsible for boosting your powers. Therefore, your magic will increase twice as much as it did before with each boost. Penemu approached him, positioning a hand on his shoulder. Besides, that's just one goal of what we accomplish in our training. With your body in the condition it's currently in, Penemu would narrow her eyes with an air of slyness about her. How many boosts do you think you could do with your balance breaker active? This made Issei's eyes sparkle with great intensity. Now that we both have some free time, I'd like to teach you that skill I mentioned to you earlier. Penemu clarified, receiving full attention from Issei. First, we must go to a desolate place. They both walked through the forest for a few minutes, arriving at a large open field where the grass glowed brightly and a huge mountain where Tiamat usually watched Issei's training could be seen. So many memories, thought the protagonist, remembering that this place is where he had been tested by Penemu. You know the transfer skill, don't you? Penemu perched beside him, watching the scenery as her long hair waved freely thanks to the breeze. Greg had explained it to me, though I've never used it before, Issei commented, rubbing his hair. Very well. Penemu nodded, then looked at him seriously. That ability is known to empower allies. But certainly, the potential of that ability is far from ending there. Hearing that, Issei looked at her with great interest. You can also empower objects, or even other elements. Elements? Issei couldn't help but ask, unable to keep up. Create a dragon shot. Issei instantly heeded her, materializing his gauntlet and implementing various boosts. Issei created a dragon shot of an average size at his level, then proceeded to look at her. Now, transfer all boosts to the attack. Hearing this, the protagonist couldn't help but blink in great surprise. Transfer. That surprise only increased even more when the insignificant ball grew to an impressive size, being as big as he was. Issei couldn't help but feel harassed at the sheer pressure of the attack. He felt that it would soon be impossible for him to control it. Now, expel it. Penemu commanded, holding Issei's back so that he wouldn't go flying when he released the attack. The attack shot out as a massive crimson bolt of lightning, traveling at a much faster speed than he was used to. The attack obliterated everything in its path, smashing into the mountain and disintegrating it completely, leaving no trace of it. The protagonist could only watch in complete shock as a huge path of destruction rose up around the place, while the attack seemed to go on, with no end in sight. Finally, he had to cover his eyes when a huge crimson glow appeared in the distance, creating a huge explosive wave that reached where they were, creating a huge blizzard that, if it hadn't been for Penemu, would have blown away almost instantly. As soon as the wave disappeared, the protagonist observed all the destruction with great astonishment, which only turned into an enormous tiredness from 1 second to the next. What's wrong with me? He asked, causing Penemu to hug him more tightly. Once the augmentations come off your body, let's just say your stats go back to normal. Penemu explained. This type of attack is very powerful, but it also represents a lot of wear and tear. In a battle, this attack should be your last card because once you use it, there won't be a second one. At least, there won't be a second one until you manage to overcome yourself again. How will I know when that time comes? The protagonist asked, receiving a small smile from Penemu due to his curiosity. It's still too early. You've improved a lot, but you're still not able to use the full potential of the balance breaker. Penemu rested her chin on top of his head, closing her eyes calmly. Perhaps when you can break those limits, you'll just be able to control such power. Break the limits? Issei wondered, then stared at her. What do you mean by that? It doesn't all end at the balance breaker. But unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to help you with that. Each bearer evolves differently, depending on the bearer's characteristics. It's something you'll have to find on your own. Kadre commented, separating herself from the protagonist as she held a finger to his head. You'll have to use your mind. Hearing this, Issei remembered Penemu's 3 main teachings. Mind, heart and body. But, in all of this, there was something strange. At what point did we train my mind? The protagonist asked. At first, Penemu was a bit shocked by his question, but quickly answered him with a smile. Do you want to play another game of chess? She asked slyly, causing Issei's mind to light up at the answer. Their chatter was interrupted when a light blue light appeared on the spot, followed by a tackle to Issei through a tight hug. The long light blue hair was the most obvious clue as to who it was. Congratulations. Tiamat congratulated him, hugging him tighter as she rubbed her cheek against Issei's with great affection. Thank you so much. A cute smile appeared on Issei's face, reciprocating the Dragoness's hug. Issei could only laugh at the Dragoness's warm attitude, though that moment was interrupted when a call came to him. The young man got up from the floor, slightly surprised to have received a call. When he saw the contact, a small smile appeared on his face. Hello Motohama. He quickly replied, causing both women to stare at him. Are you with Mitsuda? Happy birthday. A huge tower of wind shot out of the cell phone, causing Issei to turn his face away slightly as he rolled his eyes. Hearing this, both women couldn't help but be visibly surprised. Oh, we know you're far away. Motohama's voice was the first to be heard, but he could be heard being pushed away by Mitsuda. But we plan to have a barbecue when you get back to celebrate. They both tuned into the cell phone. What do you think? They asked at the same time. A small smile appeared on Issei's face. Sounds great to me. See you tomorrow. Issei cut the call, then stretched his body like a cat. I'll go stick a bath. He declared with a small yawn, heading towards the stream. Unnoticed, Penemu and Tiamat shared glances for a short second, then nodded. Obviously, they were planning something. Later that day. Issei gave a big pleasant sigh as he sat down in the middle of the stream. Nothing better than staying in the water for a while after a swim. The chestnut exclaimed with a huge grin between his teeth. He was wearing only his underwear, relaxing completely in the water. That smile on his face disappeared almost immediately after remembering his friend's congratulations. 18 years, huh? He thought, looking up at the violet sky of hell. His deep thoughts were broken as he looked at his reflection in the water, surprised to see how his muscles had changed. Now, they were all about the same slim but were perfectly marked, seeing that there wasn't a speck of fat left in his body. I hadn't noticed before, but the brown-haired man lightly squeezed his arm, making his muscles even more marked. They've changed a lot in this month. Issei couldn't help but sketch a small smile, seeing that the work had paid off more than he thought. I don't think they can grow any bigger because of my physical build. But still, it's amazing. He concluded, smiling slightly at what he was seeing. The self-exhibition ended when he heard a splash behind him, followed by 4 arms slowly sliding down his chest, enclosing him in a tight embrace. Soon, a small blush appeared on his face as he felt very soft, spongy surfaces rest along his entire back. The blush only increased when she felt a pair of lips cup both of her cheeks, delivering a nice kiss full of affection. Happy birthday. Tiamat and Penemu rested their faces on the chestnut's shoulders as a magic circle of light blue and violet appeared in front of him, revealing a sheath for his katana with a cool design. Seeing this, Issei's blush quickly dissipated and he took the sheath with starry eyes. Wow, this is cool. The chestnut exclaimed, quickly turning around and hugging them very tightly, where they didn't take a second to respond to him with the same affection. Thank you so much. There's nothing to thank. They both spoke at the same time again, unable to help but blush slightly as they felt Issei's skin so firmly. Still, that didn't stop them from stopping smiling. I'll go holster her quickly. The Brown exclaimed with great happiness, darting off to where he had left his clothes. Seriously, they're the best. Both women stared at Issei for a couple of seconds as their blushes slowly increased. Their smiles disappeared, adorning a rather serious face as their gazes seemed to wander over the brown-haired man's body. His completely toned body. The seconds continued to pass until Tiamat decided to speak. I'm getting more and more eager to be split down the middle, the rather vulgar comment left her lips, causing Penemu to nod. Me too, Cadre replied without being able to deny it, causing the blush to intensify a little more on her face. Issei placed the katana in the sheath with a big smile as she admired the design of it. The women approached, sitting down on either side of the chestnut. Something seems strange to me, Penemu commented, watching the clouds pass by. If you're a sophomore in high school and you're 18, does that mean you flunked a year? Issei couldn't help but grimace a little at the memories. You don't have to count it if you don't want to. She commented quickly, seeing that Issei looked rather annoyed. No. In fact, I'd like to talk about it. Especially, with you two. Issei rubbed his hair with a somewhat dejected smile, remembering his past. When I was little, my parents only took pictures with me during my birthdays. They were with me on the first 4. Still, they never spent time with me for anything else, especially as I got older. Finally, my 5th birthday came and it was the first one I spent alone. After those dates, I started preparing food for myself as my parents cared less and less about what I did. Not that they cared at first, though. Issei raised his gaze, giving a small sigh after remembering what happened on his 6th birthday. When I turned 6 years old, I discovered in a discussion with my parents that they wanted to give me up for adoption. They had always wanted a girl, and that is why they disowned me in this way. I think that as the years went by and they didn't even have the possibility of having another child, it made the repudiation increase more and more. Luckily, I didn't have such a bad time on my 6th birthday since I was a pretty lonely kid anyway and I didn't really understand what they meant by adoption. My 7th birthday was another one that I spent alone and somehow I felt that loneliness was starting to affect me. Luckily, when I entered 3rd grade, I met a transfer boy and we became very good friends. Issei scoffed lightly to himself. After all these years, I've only just come to find out that that boy was actually a girl. Issei smiled slightly as he felt the comforting touch of both women, indicating that they supported him all the way. She transferred before she turned 9. And from that point on, that's where the darkest time of my life begins, a somewhat wounded look graced his face. After coming out of loneliness, you don't want to go back into it ever again. Unfortunately, I was too shy and was never able to make any more friends. The years went by, and being all alone I began to find it completely ridiculous to celebrate my birthdays, being that I was only reminded of how lonely I was. When I turned 12, I began to have a mild interest in women. A childish interest, mere curiosity. Without the vigilance of my parents, you can imagine the things I discovered on the internet. For that reason, I always tried to get girls to like me, and I never succeeded. However, I never gave up. Let's just say I had gotten a little different kind of fun, he explained, then shook his head after remembering what happened the next year. My parents enrolled me in a high school where there were no girls. Obviously, my interest in going to school was zero for obvious reasons. Without having any kind of inspiration and without having the vigilance that a parent should always have over you, I just skipped the whole year, going to parks and reading not quite right magazines. But obviously they found out, since before the end of the year, they saw me in one of the parks. Still, it was too late to make up for all the lost time. A big smile graced the protagonist's face. But, that mistake I made allowed me to be in the same year as Mitsuda and Motohama, and it was there that we met. All three of us had the same interest in women, although clearly I was a bit more knowledgeable due to my parents' neglect. After a very short time, we stopped talking only about sex and started having get-togethers with each other to play video games or other things. Obviously, the subject of women was always left as the main thing, but we never quite let each other absolve ourselves of it. Issei waved his hand dismissively, that's how time went by. The great frustration of not even being able to have a girlfriend was overwhelming, but we were always together. We always supported each other. Simply put, we became inseparable. Issei laughed again, after recalling a little anecdote. In fact, the parents of the two of them were the ones who pressured mine to transfer the three of us to Kuo Academy. After getting to that part of the story, both women could feel a dark aura surround the protagonist's body at the same time as his smile slowly disappeared. The three of us went in with the idea of getting a girlfriend. We had even made a bet as to which of us would get a girlfriend first. Issei clenched his fists tightly. And she came along. He felt Penemu's hand squeeze his shoulder lightly. That part of the story we already know. You don't need to repeat it again. The woman commented quickly with a concerned tone, causing Issei to look at her with great appreciation. Thank you, he replied, positioning his hand above hers. Penemu just smiled at him, nodding her head. But whenever I remember it, I think about it and come to a conclusion. It's good that it was like this. Hearing Issei's words, both women looked at him with great surprise. After all, if Rainer had been a real thing, I would never have met Drake, I would never have met Tannen. Issei hugged them both tightly by the hips, drawing them to him and making them blush at the delicate touch. I would never have met you too. Protagonist exclaimed with a chuckle. You taught me that yes, there are amazing women. That yes, there are such nice women. That yes, there are such empathetic and caring women. Issei lowered his gaze slightly, looking at them both with great affection. You too taught me that if there are irreplaceable women. Issei could only watch in confusion as Tiamat and Penemu's eyes glowed brightly, coupled with their blushing faces. In fact, they looked like they were about to cry. Did I say something wrong? Issei asked, feeling a little sick at the sight of both of their faces. The answer came to him practically instantly as both women pounced on him, knocking him to the ground from the big hug. The protagonist only had time to scream in surprise. Saying something bad? Are you serious? Penemu asked, further reinforcing their embrace. To us, you're irreplaceable too, Issei. Tiamat replied, giving him a kiss on the forehead. We are so glad that you feel the same way. Issei could only smile, further reinforcing his embrace with them. You two are the best. By the way, tell me more about that boy who turned out to be a girl, Penemu commented, causing Issei to chuckle slightly at the memory of Irina. You can't imagine how I reacted when I found out she was really a woman, Issei began to tell the story, making Penemu chuckle slightly before the expressions the young man made to explain himself. It was simply two women and a man having fun at the edge of a stream. It wasn't very out of the ordinary. The problem comes when the ones having fun are the supposedly the coldest and most dangerous women in the world. Issei didn't realize how special he was and what he generated in those two women whenever they were near him. Probably, that innocence of his was one of the many points that enchanted the dragoness and the cadre. Several hours later. The hours passed quickly, where Issei narrated some funny stories that he spent with Mitsuda and Motohama. He was not the only one to tell certain anecdotes, as Drake joined him, as well as his other two companions, where they narrated certain stories from the past. All of them were very pleasant, even funny. It was no time to tell sad stories, especially with the atmosphere that had been generated. Simply, they all laughed together and shared the best experiences of their past together. It was nice to see everyone acting with great ease, denoting that the walls of the past between Drake and Tiamat were perhaps already slowly beginning to fade, as well as demonstrating the great trust that had been generated between the dragon and Penemu. Still, the dragoness always found a way to annoy Drake, something that seemed quite funny to Issei and Penemu, but not to Drake, for obvious reasons. Anyway, the dragon always took it quite well. After so much chatter, they all fell asleep without even realizing it. The first to wake up was Issei, who instantly realized that it was already getting dusk. How long have I been asleep? Thought the protagonist, grabbing his head. His thoughts were dispelled when he saw that his companions were still sleeping beside him. Both of them were breathing very calmly, denoting the great relief they were feeling at the moment. It was a curious thing, considering they were both dreaming horrible nightmares every day, before Issei invaded their hearts without even realizing it. The protagonist turned around, looking intently at Tiamat's entire body. It wasn't because of her obscenity, he simply felt strange, that was the word. It was very strange, the feeling her body conveyed to him. He had always wanted to be surrounded by beautiful women with a knockout body. And, if possible, naked or in their toplesses. And here they were, the two most beautiful women he had ever met, only in their underwear. Well, Penemu used a towel to cover her breasts, but it was practically like she was in her underwear. What are you thinking so hard about, partner? Drake's voice echoed through his mind, causing Issei to sigh internally. On the promise, Issei explained in his thoughts, his tone sounding genuinely confused. There's no doubt that I was able to complete it and that I can already control myself. But. Drake insisted. But now I feel a different kind of attraction, the protagonist thought, rubbing his hair as he rested his gaze on Tiamat's face. And it only happens to me with the faces of the two of them. It's strange, Issei tilted his hand hesitantly in the direction of the sleeping dragoness's face. I know very well that it's not about something dirty, simply, I want to caress her face. Issei stopped her hand just before touching Tiamat's face, feeling a discomfort begin to grip her abdomen. For some reason, I feel like it's even worse than wanting to touch her body, it's very frustrating. Drake couldn't help but smile internally, seeing how Issei was beginning, not to discover, but to accept those feelings that plunged him into misery a few months ago. Issei knew very well what he felt for them, another thing was that it was so hard for him to accept it because of his past. Would you die for me? Rainer's words echoed in his head again, making him frown. Why do I always have to remember that? Thought the protagonist with great helplessness as he held his stomach tightly with one hand, feeling how that discomfort had increased quite a bit with just 1 second of remembering the woman who had hurt him so much. On the impulse of that same helplessness, or perhaps out of sheer unconsciousness, Issei ended up positioning his hand on Tiamat's cheek, caressing it with indescribable affection. The dragoness opened her sleepy eyes, slightly surprised by what her future lover was doing. Seeing that Tiamat had discovered him, he felt like a child who had been caught doing a misdeed. I'm sorry, were Issei's simple words. He lowered his gaze, not having the strength to look her in the face as he removed his hand. Surprisingly to him, Tiamat positioned her hand above his, preventing him from leaving her cheek, then reached over and hugged him tightly. Before Issei could ask, the dragoness gave him a big beautiful smile, indicating that she had really enjoyed that touch of affection, contrary to what he had thought. The surprises didn't end there, as Penemu joined them, hugging him tightly from behind, while nestling her face in the nape of the protagonist's neck very tenderly. In addition to that, she took Issei's hand that was holding his abdomen tightly, intertwining it with her own in a rather sweet gesture. Issei couldn't help but feel a bit overwhelmed at the sudden situation, but he quickly reacted and couldn't help but tease himself. Why would I put so much thought into something so simple? It's just a simple touch. Thought the protagonist, bumping his forehead against Tiamat's, making the dragoness's smile grow even bigger as she closed her eyes in great happiness. The three of them were very cuddled for a few seconds until a call broke the harmonious sunset. Issei, can you hear me? Azazel's voice was heard through the small magic circle, causing the aforementioned to open his eyes. I'm done with Riaz and the others. We'll gather at the occult club for a vitally important meeting. Azazel turned around, looking at the small old building. See you in 5 minutes. He concluded, cutting off the call. The boss put both hands in his pockets, watching as a figure giving a glorious image approached through the door. It's been a long time, Azazel. A rather relaxed and friendly voice echoed after the door opened, causing a huge smirk to appear on Azazel's. Thanks for watching this video. Part 9 is now over. If you like this video, please subscribe and like this video. I hope I see you in the next video.